Well, welcome to our special guest and our friend, Amanda Archibald. Amanda, good morning. How are you this morning?
Good morning from the other side of the Rockies. We always talk about this, right?
We do, we do.
We're-
Yeah.
I'm on the west side, you're on the other side.
You're on the warm side right
I'm
now.
on the
And
warm side. Yep.
yeah.
Yes.
Well, we are so jazzed to talk to you today because listeners, today we are talking specifically about genomics and vitamin D. Yes, vitamin D, you know it. Well, hopefully you know about it, but we're going to get a little bit into the specifics regarding vitamin D and genomics, genetics, triggering certain pathways. We're going to just totally go off on this and with a focus of bone health. So, with all that said, before we jump in, Amanda, share with us like what's been going on in the genomics field lately? Like what's new, what's exciting, what's happening? Because a lot of our listeners obviously don't follow nutrigenomics that much.
No, I mean it's a field that I want to say it's rapidly expanding. It is rapidly expanding. It's getting a lot more traction among us, as practitioners and
Yeah.
experts. I think you're seeing some companies around the world really fine tuning their offering. So we may use 3x4 as a fantastic company here in the US and in some countries around the world. So you see them adding more and more genes to their panels, which allows us to really fine tune our lens to more deeply get to root cause or answer the questions for our clients. So I'm seeing that with several companies now. They're coming out with better and better products.
Mm.
And I think, as we all know, with 3x4 came out with their Gene Fit product, which is designed very specifically for athletes. I think they're still fine tuning that. I don't know enough about that product. You two may know more, but it's a great it's an app, right? That
Hmm.
actually works with the 3x4 genetics test. So they kind of talk to each other. So you can self-optimize based on your
Oh.
genes, and it sort of correlates with your training as well. So I think that's a brilliant product. And we're probably only going to see more and more as testing companies really decide how to customize their offerings as well. So
They do need to make it a little bit easier for consumers to use because you can get the report and have one of us interpret it and put it into your dietary plan, your
yeah,
exercise plan. But I feel like these apps, it's kind of taking it to the next level because genomics testing is largely a one and done test, right? You do it once, but
yeah,
then
you do
you
it
actually
once.
have to manipulate the data on an
Hmm.
ongoing basis, right? It's not
Yeah.
just, oh, that's fine, that's great. I'll change my nutrition today, but not worry about it tomorrow. Like it doesn't work that way. So I love this kind of what 3x4 is coming out here.
Yeah, and have a lot of interest in the technology on how we can speed up the reading of it. So that's really in my space,
Oh,
pattern
yeah,
recognition,
yeah.
and then putting that into apps. I think there's huge opportunity. It's just, yeah, we're still kind of in some ways in an infancy in the technology side of
Mm.
how we can optimize this. So
But the
yeah, so
testing
that's
side is
something.
pretty solid, right? It's just the interpreting with the technology. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just such a huge opportunity, especially with AI now, which is what I'm really looking at, is
Oh, okay.
how can we see patterns? How can we optimize them? How can we speed up the reading from us on the
Mhm.
practitioner side so we can, spend more time on the implementation side, which is really where, the genes are one thing, it's a big pattern, right?
Yeah,
But how
yeah,
can then we leverage our expertise
yeah.
once those patterns are read? That's really an area of technology I've been looking at a lot in the last year.
That is
Yeah.
awesome. And I know Dina and I get this quite often from athletes when we talk about testing and how important it is. Obviously, the cost factor always comes up. Are you
Mhm.
seeing any changes in that in the landscape lately? Like, is the cost starting to come down a little bit, or what's
You
been
know
going on
what?
there?
I mean, to me, the answer to bringing the cost down is when we can speed up the technology, right? And
Oh,
that's
okay. Yeah.
really where, but I can't really speak to it. I've seen that the cost stabilize and not really go up. So, but you know what? I mean, yeah, see, let's say the average cost is 300 US dollars. I
Yeah.
mean, a lab panel can cost you that, right? So
Oh, easily.
this is
Yeah.
something that should be at the front of your medical record, in my opinion, because it doesn't change. Epigenetics will change how your genes behave, but how you're built is the same. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a pretty good $300 investment. It's very useful to us, right? As experts, like, bam, we know exactly what's going on here. Let's go
For
after this.
sure.
So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And very valid because it's a one and done test. So it's that first
yeah.
thing you should have. Yeah.
That's what I think.
Yeah. Great. Great.
Amanda, when we start talking about bone health in the time that we have today, I wonder, and even bringing in vitamin D, I wondered because it's such a vast topic and it's more than just bones. I wonder what kind of top things come to your radar, especially when you're working with clients in the nutrigenetic space or the nutrigenomic space. Where do you kind of start to peel back the layers that come across your radar?
So when we're talking about bone health specifically,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I think one of the things I learned the most from genomics is bone health may have a lot to do with something like vitamin D, or it may have little or nothing. So if we were
Hmm.
to look at my genomic report, I have osteoporosis, which we're now working backwards. you know,
Yeah.
these things are labels. Diseases are labels. Genomics helps us peel back. And you peel back that label, you get the sticky stuff off, and reorient someone. So that's the brilliance of the field. But specific to bone health, if you were to look at my genomics, there is nothing in my genomics traditionally that would suggest that I would have like bone demineralization or issues with bone health, because my vitamin D associated SNPs, I think I've just got one, and it's very low
Wow.
impact. So
Wow.
this is where genomics is so helpful in helping us clinically ask questions about, well, where's this coming from? And that for me personally is where I started down a completely different path and developed a passion to look at bone health, because probably all of us are working with midlife clients, not necessarily,
Hmm.
not specifically, but I know, Dina, you are midlife and beyond. That's definitely my clientele. And 8 out of 10 can walk in with osteopenia and
Hmm.
perfect vitamin D metabolism. So, yeah, my passion is really peeling back the list. And we're looking at this health aspect all wrong. We're looking at bones wrong, or we have been.
So when you look at that, I love what you just said, kind of looking at it a little bit wrong, really. I mean, let's
Mhm.
call it for what it is, right? So it's not just about vitamin D. It's not just, in back in the days, check the box D, got it.
Got
Back in
it.
the days, it was all about, oh, just eat calcium, eat calcium, eat
Yeah,
calcium,
the
right?
worst,
I
yes.
know, right? And then it shifted. We're like, oh, there are other nutrients. Like, are you
Hmm.
targeting on your path like the myriad of nutrients, of micronutrients, or are there other things that you're also doing on your path here
I
with
mean,
bone health?
obviously, vitamin D's in the room, right? But vitamin
Right.
D does, and we really need to talk about the metabolism. So, let's make sure we come back to that, because it's
Yeah.
critical. Because all three of us, and many of you listening may say, but I keep taking my vitamin D. I've even switched the form. I'm taking 5,000, whatever I
Mm-hmm.
use. And some people are taking 20,000, which is almost dangerous,
Yeah.
if it's
Yeah.
not supervised. And their vitamin D levels are not budging. It's like, duh. If it's
Yeah.
not budging, what are we not thinking of? So let's make sure we come back to vitamin D, because it's fascinating. And also, we need to talk about vitamin D above and beyond its role in bones, which is a
Mm.
lot of my interest as well.
Right.
But any disease, the root cause is going to be inflammation, no matter where we
Mm-hmm.
look at it. And
Mm-hmm.
our job is to figure out, where that inflammation is coming from, because especially with athletics, inflammation is going to lead to potentially mitochondrial dysfunction, right?
Right.
Mitochondrial dysfunction, no ATP, people, right? So
Yep.
you
Yep.
end up like winding down, not winding up. You become more and more depleted. The three areas that I think that I see affect bone metabolism, bone health are hormone depletion. So we see that is very clear in the literature, male and female.
Mm-hmm.
As we go into our mid years, all of us are going to go through some form of hormone depletion. Testosterone, estrogen.
Uh-huh.
Estrogen is critical for bone remodeling, for that osteoblastic activity. And so many women, particularly, are denied hormone replacement therapy. It's not
Mm-hmm.
even a conversation. So,
Mm-hmm.
genomics really helps us sort that out. So, I'm very passionate about that. So, there's the hormone piece. Number one, we've talked about inflammation, hormone. And then two things that get tied together is, in particular, we see this in genomics a lot. We're looking at methylation. So
Mm-hmm.
this is this wonderful process of producing a molecule that is used all over the body. But one of the ways that we look as whether this biochemical process is working is we measure something called homocysteine, which is a
Mm-hmm.
routine lab, right? Everyone should have their
Mm-hmm.
homocysteine checked at least once a year,
Yeah.
because it has such an important role. from a cardiovascular perspective, right? That's
Yeah, oh,
critical
yeah.
for
Oh,
athletics.
huge. It's
It's
huge.
huge, and we're not looking at it. And also, when we're looking at the bone matrix, elevated levels of homocysteine, which are very frequent with people because of this complex pathway.
Right.
Elevated levels of homocysteine will interfere with the bone matrix. It's actually more the collagen matrix.
Mm.
So it can interfere with the cross-linking. When you
Hmm.
interfere with that, whether it's tissue or bone or both, then you can interfere with bone mineralization. So then you literally, we can have all the calcium we want and all the phosphate we want and
Yeah.
all the silicon we want, whatever, or boron,
Yeah.
whatever's trending.
Yeah.
And elevated homocysteine will interfere because it's an inflammatory marker, will interfere
Hmm.
with bone mineralization or bone remodeling.
And isn't that funny that it's not measured? I mean, honestly, all
Ugh,
these labs I'm looking at from athletes, I'm like, where's homocysteine? I mean, I literally
it's
have to ask,
Yeah.
like,
yes,
make sure you ask your physician or wherever you're getting your blood work
please.
test. Yeah.
It's as important as a CRP, right?
Yeah.
To me,
Yeah.
it's even more insightful because it's at the intersection of so many pathways for us, and
Hmm.
it's absolutely fixable. So, and then the other thing so that's homocysteine when we're looking at bone matrix building. But as we know, as you guys know this, like walk around thinking about this, elevated levels of homocysteine when they're elevated, homocysteine will be transformed into a molecule called it's called HTL, histone thiolactone. I think that's the right word, right?
That's
And
impressive. That's a tongue twister right there.
yeah, it is right. So HTL, everyone, you don't need to memorize this, but if you're an athlete, this piece is critical
Yeah.
because HTL, elevated levels. So this is a toxic molecule. What it will do is it will deactivate the enzyme. Are we ready for this? That keeps the ADMA receptor like
Yep.
in its place. The ADMA receptor, when it's kind of let out of its rabbit hole, will prevent the production of nitric oxide. It will deplete nitric oxide
Oh,
production. So you want
interesting.
to think elevated levels of homocysteine, lower levels of nitric oxide. That's where the cardiovascular piece comes in
Not a
because
good thing
lower
to have
levels of
happen.
nitric oxide, right, leads
Hmm.
to endothelial dysfunction, aka your blood vessels are not healthy. And the
Yes.
other thing, so we link it all together. So from an athletic perspective, it's like, oh my gosh, absolutely. The homocysteine is like root. You have to go after it.
Yeah.
It's a critical marker for any human, but I think for athletes, especially if you're
Yeah.
feeling depleted or your VO2 max out or whatever, however that works,
Yeah. Yeah.
however you measure it, it's critical because once you get to this um, injury to your vasculature, and you can appear healthy,
Hmm.
once you get to injury, and this is such of like this is the crown jewel here, then you start to see changes in your cholesterol levels.
Mm.
And so we often will see with elevated homocysteine, we'll often see elevated levels of LDL or
Hmm.
oxidized LDL, which is another crusher.
Yep.
So and this is, thought, why do I keep seeing these people with osteoporosis, elevated homocysteine, dyslipidemia, which
Hmm.
means, changes to how your body's metabolizing cholesterol and lipids. And it's all connected, right? So you
Yeah.
can see this connection. So not only are you got changes to your cardiovascular structure, right,
Right.
and health and output probably, but at the same
Hmm.
time you're depleting your bones. so,
Yeah. Right.
so this is
Yeah.
like is critical. And so if we go back to my genomics,
Yeah.
no issues with my LDL. Well, there were, and when we
Mm.
added estrogen back in, totally restored my lipid levels. Hello.
Wow. Okay.
But once we brought my homocysteine down, then things started to work,
Yeah.
and I changed my activity. Then I could start to see changes in my bone markers, started looking at inflammation. So it didn't matter how much vitamin D I took. That was not
Right.
my problem. So
Right.
genomics allows us to think like detectives
Yeah.
to restore homeostasis or balance. So that's my story, Dina.
That's
Yeah.
actually good. No, Dina, I have really quick
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
real quick, because it's on. I'll lose it if I don't ask right now. So from what you mentioned, Amanda, this is fascinating, and I don't think a lot of people realize this, athlete or non-athlete. So
Yeah.
you're putting homocysteine together with with cholesterol, really, right? And you think, and then
Think
obviously
about that.
with
Yeah.
low bone density. So when I think of this, here's the physiologist in me. I'm like, okay, how do we test? How do we measure? So, okay, most people are getting a basic blood lipid test, basic cholesterol, LDL-C, HDL-C, triglycerides, very basic from their
Very.
doctor on their quote unquote physical exam, which
Mm-hmm.
really doesn't tell us that much.
Mm-mm.
That's a topic for another podcast, but okay, so they're getting that. This is what I'm setting up here. And they're probably not doing a DEXA because they don't maybe know what a DEXA is. And that's how, a lot of athletes use it for body composition, but I really like to use it for bone
Yeah, exactly.
bone density. So they're probably not getting that. So they're getting this very basic blood cholesterol level from their doctor, maybe once a year. They're not doing a DEXA, so they don't know what their bone density is. They're certainly not probably getting homocysteine unless they're doing more of a functional based blood work, which I see that popping up a lot more functional versus Western medicine. So now it's like three strikes almost, maybe two strikes.
Mm-hmm.
And they're walking around like to my point is like it is so easy to know what's going on in your body. You just have to know what to measure first,
Yes.
right? Okay. I
Yes.
just wanted to set that to kind of reiterate that to our listeners. It's actually easy to, like a lot of the technical things we're talking about today, people are like, what? But it's
Yeah.
actually, if we boil it down, we just have to do a few tests and a few measurements, which are super easy to get done
Mm-hmm.
and very economical, by the way. But we're
Yeah.
not getting that done.
I
And
mean,
that's
I would
frustrating.
say, like for your listeners, exactly like you said, homocysteine is a routine lab in the United States. Try getting it in the United Kingdom. No.
Yeah. Oh,
So I work around the world. It's just like, are you serious? But anyway,
oh
I
my
mean,
gosh.
there's different strokes for different folks. So
Right.
the way, like I said, we like us when we're looking at your health and your listeners need to demand this. I don't care how old you are. Particularly over 30, you start going after this
Mm,
truly. But you need a CBC, right? A complete blood count. That's easy. That's routine. That's where we're looking at your immune system. We can
mhm,
immediately detect functionally when something looks normal to you and your doctor, it's not for us. So we're going to chase after that. The homocysteine is critical, easy
mhm,
lab. And then what I'm looking at, and you guys are easy to be able to put this together. We also would, because we know how homocysteine works, how we build it, how we break it down. We need information about your folate,
mhm,
magnesium, zinc, and B12. And they're
mhm,
very specific labs we're looking at because if you have elevated homocysteine, there's nutrients we're looking at that work with it to bring it down, to build it and metabolize and break it down. And these are easy labs. The only
yeah.
difference is we want RBC. So
Mhm,
oftentimes labs of serum, what you're seeing. So the word RBC, red blood cell, means tissue. It means your
mhm,
warehouse, right? So that's the difference. And usually from that, yeah, we need your vitamin D, but yeah, right.
yeah.
But we're looking at bone metabolism and genomics will also tell us as well immediately, like we're looking at specific genes, whether you have some potential disruption in lipids, regardless of how well you eat and exercise. There's these new neighbors that are not nice neighbors sometimes.
Yeah.
I call them rabble rousers, but that may be a British term. Like, it's
Oh.
like, oh man, did you have to move in? Um, we can see that in genetics. But yeah, if you get a routine lab and you have an elevated LDL, we don't just leave it at that. That's when we
Right.
go after the advanced testing, right?
Right.
So you can go there, but then
Hmm.
you should ask your doctor for an ApoB. That is far more useful
Hmm.
for us than any other
Exactly.
lipid test, right?
Exactly.
HDL and ApoB will probably be
Yeah.
routine. They're routine. So
Absolutely.
As we were talking about, and you hinted at this too, Amanda, the metabolism of vitamin D, since we did want to mention some of that, anyways. And I think for listeners that might be brand new to all this, like I thought I just test vitamin D and I either supplement or I get more sunshine if I can, and that's that. I wondered if you wanted to share that visual that you have, and then we can kind of
yeah.
talk through it for the listeners right at the moment, and then we can have a link to it also, but just to appreciate, like it is fairly, it's more than just one system at play,
Mm.
and kind of talk through that metabolism piece.
Yeah, let me pull that up here. Sorry. We've been so busy talking. I've lost
Yeah.
where I put it, but here it is. So hopefully you want to, so we're going to talk from a graphic here, but
Hmm.
that's how do you want to let your listeners know where to find this?
Yeah, we'll put it in our show notes, and then we'll put part of this here on our YouTube channel as well.
Okay, perfect,
Yeah.
perfect.
Yep.
All right. So we talk about vitamin D. So we think, and let's just have, like you said, like an armchair discussion here. So
Yeah.
let's just jump in. So everyone knows, right, that we need vitamin D because it's integral to bone matrix formation. So the strength of your bones, strong teeth is what we always think about, right?
Yeah.
But it has so many other implications in the body. So I think trying to show you where its roles are, or showing everyone where the roles of vitamin D are, will explain why it's so important. However, there may be some of you listening saying, well, I take a vitamin D supplement
Mm.
because that's where most people are getting it from, or I'm in the sun because I'm an athlete. And of course, in Colorado, don't we have the most sun in the country?
We
So
we do. Yet
we have,
yet still the vitamin D deficiency is
yeah,
high.
so we have
Yeah.
vitamin D deficiency.
Right.
Why is that? Because you can't just take vitamin D or get it from food or get it from the sun or take it in a supplement and expect it to be miraculously used in your body. So there is a gene. So what you're seeing here, let me kind of stay on track here. In the purple here are those are the names of genes. Okay. And what do genes do? The genes are responsible for creating proteins that get the business of the body done. They act like enzymes, which are movers and shakers. Okay. So let's start with the sun and let's talk about why we have some people who just don't respond to supplementation or don't respond to just being out in the sun. What we're not seeing here, and this is a visual from 3x4 genetics, just so you know, it's educational visual. I think it's pretty cool. Is there's a gene here that they're not measuring, and I think it's like DHCR7. So there's a gene here that will take the precursor to vitamin D, which is ergocalciferol, cholecalciferol. Depends
Okay.
whether it's from a plant or an animal, so
Hmm.
what the molecule is.
Hmm.
And in conjunction with UV light, we can initiate the process of the body transforming vitamin D into a form that it can use. So the vitamin D that you get in food or that we take in a supplement is this here. It's in a certain form. What we have to do is get it to this form here. So the body has to transform that, which is why some of us can stand out in the sun all day long and it makes no difference to our vitamin D level because it has to go through a pathway. Like think about climbing up a ladder where each rung has a specific, a role, if you will, in getting to the top of the ladder. So what you're seeing here is we have genes. This is a transportation gene. It picks up vitamin D from your food. It says, okay, now we got to take it to the liver. And then from the liver, we need this gene here to let's go back here. We transport vitamin D to the liver. This gene in the liver transforms vitamin D into this form, which then goes to the kidney, where vitamin D is then actually converted to this form. There are other genes in this pathway which are not being shown. So the bottom line is, as we like to say, clinically or scientifically, there are rate limiting steps, or there's a bunch of doors that can be slammed closed in your body that mean that you can't get through very efficiently without pushing really hard to help vitamin D get to the form the body can use it in. So I'll stop right there
Yeah.
so that you guys can say, hey, clarify this, or let me restate that.
Well, and I think a lot of athletes that I talk to, they say, "Oh, like to your point, they'll say, no, I'm out in the sun. I automatically get vitamin D." And you actually don't just automatically get it. Like it is
No,
actually once the sun hits the skin and your body starts to transform that and
it's
actually
here.
use that, it's inactive though. It has to be
It's
activated,
inactive.
right?
Yes.
So that's the big thing. And it's inactive prior to the liver, I believe, correct? And then it gets
Yes.
activated via enzymes.
If
So,
it's efficient, right?
right.
And so we have an enzyme here. So it's not, I would say, of all the genes that I look at, because
Mm,
I'm looking at frequency data as well,
yeah,
not only published frequency, but also as I'm looking at it in my practice.
right.
This one here is probably the one that comes up the most dysfunctional. That's
I
CYP2R1, which you can see is like the first step. That
exactly.
it's an activating step.
Is it safe to say that if someone, athlete or non-athlete, has a SNP, which we've been talking about, which is basically a spelling error, that it's an
Yes.
error on your gene, on this gene specifically, then the sun or the vitamin D that may be made from the sun will actually not be activated that well, if at all, because they have an error on the gene that
Yes.
activates
Yes.
it. And they don't
Yes.
know that. So to your point earlier, they might be taking a surplus of vitamin D supplements
Mhm.
and it's not working because they simply may have an error on a gene or a
Correct.
spelling mistake. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
And
I,
genomics tells us that, right? And sometimes,
Yeah.
as we all know, um, we have to change the form of the vitamin D. The tendency is like,
right.
oh, it's low, so take more and more and more. It's like, no, why don't we kind of look at how you built?
Mm,
And there's other amazing pieces to know here. So you're absolutely right. So taking more and more and more and not getting a response means stop taking more and more and let's figure out the why. And there's
mm,
two major whys here, and we haven't even got through to the end yet.
yeah.
But I cannot emphasize enough how important magnesium is to
Mm,
these, as we call them, cofactors or supporters to these steps. I have a slide somewhere. I mean, magnesium is probably the right hand nutrient for vitamin D. Would you guys agree?
oh yeah.
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 I mean,
I
there's
mean,
also the vitamin K, which I'd like to bring up eventually,
yep.
but yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, if you look, magnesium is probably the most in demand mineral or nutrient in the body, I would argue. Maybe
Absolutely. Absolutely.
magnesium and probably zinc right next to it, right? I
Yep.
mean, they
Yep.
drive their cofactors for so many reactions. So
Yeah.
the more vitamin D you need, the more magnesium you need. So eat your nuts and seeds, people.
Yeah.
you know.
Amanda, is
Uh,
there, a lot of people will say, well, okay, I'm just going to take a magnesium supplement for whatever reason they don't want to eat their nuts and seeds. But is there a specific type of magnesium or does it not matter when it comes to the,
It depends, and this is where it was actually a question back to you guys on this because this is so important. Then I want to talk about vitamin A, but um, I don't say, okay, there's a beautiful form of magnesium that works that pairs beautifully with vitamin D, right? It's
right?
more of, okay, we need to supplement magnesium, but what is going on with that individual?
Hmm.
If there's GI issues, we're going to need
Hmm.
use a completely different form of magnesium than if there is sleep or anxiety issues,
Right. Right.
right? So maybe magnesium taurate, maybe if everyone's perfect, if someone's perfect, they don't have any GI issues or whatever. But usually there's something in the background, right, with
Okay.
people.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have a preferred form with your athletes, or are you also, well, it depends.
I think it does depend. I usually go to glycinates for the most part, because we're talking more muscle functioning there.
Mm-hmm.
I do use threonate for my aging athletes, more for the
Yes, exactly.
cognitive.
Yeah.
But to your point, here's the thing: we need to pick the magnesium, like right tool for the right job, right? So what are we
Correct.
trying to get out of this? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And it could be age dependent, like you said. So,
yeah.
so I never have, no, it's this form and this is the perfect supplement
Okay,
because
okay,
we may be formulating the magnesium with other things
yeah.
again. So magnesium is critical. So if you're taking a bunch of vitamin D and magnesium is nowhere to be found, then you're wasting a bunch of money. You
Hmm.
just are.
Yep,
Most of us need some form of vitamin D supplement, period.
right.
Um, some that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah,
But test, don't guess.
yeah.
Don't take something you don't need. I'm
Exactly,
so conservative there. So
exactly.
magnesium. So you can put in every step here, just put magnesium. Okay. But then we get down to here. So this is a little transportation molecule. You're like, well, what do these purple boxes mean here?
Mm,
So one of the most important things about vitamin D is it's a hormone. So that means it sends signals to the body.
mhm,
And the way it does that, so the way we have to get vitamin D into this active form here, then it comes down to something called a VDR. So we
mhm,
got it ready to go. And then its job is to bind with something called the vitamin D receptor. That's what VDR means.
mhm,
So great. We've got that receptor. Hold on to that. But vitamin D does not work without vitamin A.
mhm,
Oh, and this is critical, which is why you see some supplements or it may be D3K2. And I'm thinking, but what about vitamin A?
mm,
Because for vitamin D to do its job, it has a receptor, VDR, VDR can't work without this RXR. So think of it as a complex or a twinning.
Mm,
The RXR stands for retinoid X receptor. And if anyone
mm,
knows anything about biochemistry, retinoid means vitamin A.
mhm,
So A and D have to go together. So here's the kicker, that retinol is the active form of vitamin A.
mhm,
So that's great if you're eating foods that contain vitamin A. Vitamin A is found in a lot of foods. The active form is found in animal foods.
mhm,
Okay, well, what happens if you don't eat animal foods? Well, you can convert the precursor or the infant form, if you will, the immature form of vitamin A from beta carotene. So we find that in all our colorful, like our oranges and our reds and our yellow fruit and
mhm,
vegetables, right? So fabulous, no problem. Except, just like with vitamin D, vitamin A also has some genes involved in
mm,
converting the plant sources of a vitamin A to the active form. Let me restate that.
right.
So the body, animal sources will provide an active form of vitamin A. So you can immediately create this twinning here.
Mm,
If you choose for whatever reason to eat plant sources only or plant foods only, you can certainly get an active form of vitamin A, but it requires a conversion step.
mm,
And that gene is called BCM01. So BC,
mhm,
like BC in Canada, British Columbia,
yep.
CMO1. That is responsible for taking beta carotene and converting it to retinol. Several testing companies don't test that gene, but when they do, I would say it's at least 25% of people have an issue with that conversion. They don't
Wow.
convert beta carotene to the active form of vitamin A well. So the point there is, how do you know unless you test, right? You don't
Yeah.
know.
Right.
So you're
Right.
guessing. So could the problem be with things like osteoporosis? So if you have immune issues, not a vitamin D problem, it might be a vitamin A problem.
Mm.
Genetics helps us see that.
That is fascinating, actually. It kind of comes back to the whole if you're taking a vitamin D supplement and nothing's working, like it's not increasing
Yeah.
your levels, it's
What's
almost like a duh, right?
duh?
But we don't know
Yeah.
that because we don't have this knowledge yet, but our listeners now
Correct.
have it. But two, we're not having it tested, which is super easy to test, right?
It's super easy to and look at it, and this doesn't change. This is
Right,
it. This is
right.
how you are built. This is like your
Yeah,
blueprint. It's what we roll out. So,
yeah.
so yeah, so you can already see like vitamin D, we don't, and you look at supplements like, oh gosh, then you need boron and you know silicon.
Mm,
And some of these supplements are really expensive. I can think of
yeah.
one company, and it's guesswork whether it's working for somebody or not. It's like, yeah, like 7 out of 10 people, this supplement regimen, $100 a month
Yeah, yeah,
works. What
yeah.
about the 20% it didn't? Why isn't it
Exactly.
working? Right?
Exactly.
Mhm.
Genomics helps us see that right away, plus the right form of activity, which I cannot under stress. That's to
Yeah.
me the movement piece, which is lost on your audience because they all move.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
you know, you can't restore bone health without the right kind of movement and the right kind of stress on your muscles to stress your bones,
Yeah.
right? So, but anyway, the last piece that's so interesting about vitamin D, we see it. So we're looking at it works with vitamin A, but you see these other boxes here, like the TAC1, BSM1, and FOK1. These are all different kind of forms of that vitamin D receptor, right?
Mm,
So depending on whether those vitamin D forms have a spelling error on them, we have different outcomes. So that's why
mm,
if you're listening to this, definitely kind of go back or push pause or say, oh, I'll keep listening to this, but I got to go see what Amanda and Dina and Bob are
mhm,
looking at. Because what we're looking at is depending on the spelling error of that vitamin D receptor, you can have different health outcomes. And the
mm,
one that's most interesting to me is this FOK1, the
mm,
FOK1 form of the vitamin D receptor. If you have a spelling error on that, it can interfere with bone remodeling. We call that bone turnover. It can interfere with whether your body will stimulate osteoblasts to rebuild bone or whether it will stimulate osteoclasts to resorb or break it down. So you can
mm,
have an imbalance there. You also see there's a connection with immunity. So vitamin D is critical for immune balance. I mean, I think that's way beyond what we want to talk about today, but
Yeah, yeah.
right, it just is. But one thing I will say is there's a lot of literature that connects in a deficiency of vitamin D with poor sleep. And you're like, how can that possibly be? What has my
Mm,
vitamin D got to do with sleep? And it so turns out that if you have a spelling error on this FOK1 form of the vitamin D receptor, um, and it will be for both of you, it's the T form, the T allele, the T
mhm,
genotype or TT genotype. That is associated in the literature with poor sleep quality. I'm like,
mm,
how can that possibly be? Well, this is where we step out of vitamin D being for teeth and bones and immunes,
mm.
and you cannot build dopamine or serotonin, which are brain hormones, without sufficient vitamin D.
Mm.
It's part of
So,
the process.
oh,
So,
yeah,
what happens when you have elevated levels of dopamine or very low levels of serotonin? A lot of those people, or a lot of us, can have a hard time sleeping, and it's got nothing to do with, whether I'm taking ashwagandha
Hmm.
right.
or licorice or whatever. It has to do with you don't have enough serotonin to sleep, is it, or there's
Mm,
some dysfunction with dopamine. So that's kind of
Hmm.
advanced science. But who would have thought, or who's thinking that a snip or spelling error in how your body handles vitamin D can result in poor sleep? And we're not
right.
thinking about that.
Which is really interesting to me because everyone blames certain things on sleep or lack of sleep or not being able to sleep. But it kind of comes down, I mean, if you're really looking at this, it comes down to understanding that vitamin D is a hormone,
Yeah,
right? And
it
that is
is.
why it's interacting on so many pathways in the body. And that's what I try to teach athletes. I'm like, this isn't I mean, it says vitamin D, yes, but it's actually a hormone that is
It's a
interacting on
hormone.
so many different pathways and systems in the body. And that, like your graphic, again, listeners, you go, in the show notes, click on it, go to our YouTube channel so we can explain this to you because that to me cleared a lot of things up. And it's actually a very easy way to explain what's happening in the body with vitamin D, which is a hormone.
Yeah. So, yeah, vitamin D is everywhere, but it's way more than bones, as you heard me talk about. It's something I look at, but it's a
Yeah,
very small piece. I'm looking at many
Yeah.
other genes that are,
right.
how is your bone being built? How's it broken down? There's other genes that are can really cause a lot of noise in how your bone is remodeled, which we need to understand, which directly impacts your training, by the way.
Oh
Depending
yeah.
if you have a lot of turnover with like collagen synthesis or something like that, or if you have genes that predispose you to high levels of oxidative stress, you have to change your training, right? And
Hmm.
your regimen and how you're eating. Otherwise, you're going to be injured over and over and over and over again. It's got
Oh my
nothing to do with
gosh.
vitamin D.
Yes, yes, yeah,
I
totally.
just wanted to comment on something you said earlier, Amanda, like with your own personal profile, like you only showed one SNP in your like bone health related,
Mm-hmm.
those genes you were just showing. So looking at all of these other genes that influence inflammation or other pathways or other nutrient pathways, how important that is. So even for those like, oh, I need to get some testing and look at the genes related to vitamin D metabolism is so much more than that too,
Mm-hmm.
which can seem overwhelming, but it's part of this big picture that you always talk about is like it's not just one gene or gene
Mhm.
variant. It's
No.
a more complex, bigger picture that we have to look at.
100%. And also look at it with someone who's trained to interpret
Mhm.
it. This is
Yeah.
not over the counter, end of the aisle, cheap genetic testing. It's not loading your 23andMe to like a consolidator or reader, because when we're reading genes, all the genes have gone through scientific
Mm.
validation and they're clinically actionable, which means we can do something about what we're looking at. We're not guessing, you know.
Mhm.
We're trained to look at patterns for humans. That's important.
Hmm.
That's why I think it is important. I think for people who do this testing is to align yourself with a health professional who knows how to interpret these because without it, even though these companies are doing a really good job at their interpretation summaries and packets and information, it's still very difficult to put it into practice into someone's life, right? Without some counsel, right?
100%. And a lot of these tests, the output can look really pretty.
Oh
And you'll be
yeah.
saying, oh, you're this kind of an eater, you're
Yep.
Paleolithic or
Yep. Yep.
Neolithic or whatever else you are. And immediately you'll see, gosh, you've got this gene, this, or you need to take more vitamin A or vitamin D. As in our whole conversation here is that is not necessarily so.
Yeah.
And if they're
Yeah.
only
Yeah. Yeah.
testing one gene for vitamin D, as we've just talked about, we're looking at multiple to get a picture. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's not line item nutrition. You got this gene, take that.
Right.
That will
Right.
have you wasting a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be easy if it was that simple, but the body's just not that simple, right?
Nope, nope, nope. We're very dynamic.
Well, I know this whole topic could be several more hours just alone on bone health
Oh,
and then all of the
for
other systems
sure.
that tie in. So you've given us I think, a good glimpse, Amanda, but so much more. And this is why you are such a pioneer in this whole field. And we highly respect all that you offer and curious about sharing a few maybe projects that you're working on or some new things coming up here in 2025 for you.
Yeah, well, my website, Genomic Kitchen, is in transition right now. So if you go look at it, check it in about 6 weeks. But
Okay.
something I've wanted. I grew up in Europe. I'm a European by birth, but an American as well. So I'm fortunate to have that dual citizenship, if you will. So for me, for a long time, I've wanted to offer a retreat or an experience, immersion experience for people that's guided by your DNA. So instead of just like coming to meet with me to read your DNA, this is an immersion experience and it's called Recode. So we have the first Recode retreat in Portugal this year now. Finally, we're in
Oh my
2025.
gosh.
I am launching a podcast, hopefully late winter called Beyond the Sequence. And that's
Can't wait.
literally where I'm talking with a colleague about what we see when we look at DNA, and so along the lines of what we've talked about here, but it's sort of peeling back the DNA and things we're seeing as clinicians that are interesting and exciting and useful. So it's geared for the public and for practitioners as well. So kind of gentle listening, and we got a formula for that. So those are my two major things, along with working with some very fun international partners on projects. So
That's fantastic. And so we'll push people to the Genomic Kitchen website if we can right now, if it's
oh yeah,
because
push it.
I
Just
want them.
check
Yeah.
back.
There's a lot of
Okay. I
nuggets
do
on that site.
I do just I want to make sure that they know how to, find out information about your Recode, your retreat in Portugal, because that sounds super, super
It
cool.
is,
So
and it's only
yeah,
for
well,
18 people, and it's
oh my
it's
gosh.
selling. It's
Yeah.
selling.
All
So
right.
yeah.
So maybe we could put some info in our show notes or something somehow to get a hold of you or to register for
Yeah,
that or
totally.
to look at
For
that.
sure.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, well, this is like Dina said, Amanda, before we get to our high five questions, I do want to thank you because, when we talk to each other, we always learn from each other. And I always learn so much from you. And I love the pathway that you showed. I haven't seen that graphic and it really just helps. I'm such a visual learner and
Yeah,
visual
you are. Yeah.
teacher
Yeah.
that I love the visuals and it brought it home. Like it really made
Hmm.
it so much easier to understand. So thank you for sharing
No,
that.
no, you're
Um,
welcome.
and I do agree with Dina. We could spend hours with this, and there's so many topics that we're going to ask you to come back on our podcast and talk about. So
The
be ready for
Colorado
those.
huddle.
That's right. That's right. But let's jump into our high five. So we did these, I don't know, I think it's been like a year and a half or so since we had you on last time. So we've chosen different questions. And remember, these are just questions so our listeners can get to know you a little bit better if you don't mind. But Dina, do you want to start or you want me to start?
You can start, Bob.
Okay, I'll start. So question number one, based on all the genomic talk and all this chatter, and I saw some of the recipes you were working with on Facebook that you were doing over the holidays, what's your favorite breakfast to make? Do you have a favorite breakfast?
It'll usually involve eggs and some kind of sauerkraut or kimchi,
Oh,
So
okay.
Ah,
Okay.
yeah, because we all have to fuel with protein, right? So we fuel
Yeah.
with protein. You can get your veggies in there, and then the probiotics, a natural
Yeah.
supplement, are coming from the fermented food. So
Yeah.
that's usually where I'm gonna go.
Love it.
okay.
Love it.
Love it. You do travel a lot, Amanda. So question number two, I was curious, what is one thing you always take with you when you travel?
At my phone, yeah. No.
Okay.
There you go.
No.
There you go.
Yeah, reading material. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
always
Oh,
gonna, yeah, reading, something to read. And usually if I will take some knitting, believe it or not.
Oh,
mm,
As to whether
cool.
I knit, but yeah, I usually have that with me now that we can take
Nice.
photos on planes again. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
awesome.
Perfect. Okay, number three, what is your favorite herb? And I know this is going to be a tough one for you, probably, because you like all of them.
Tarragon. It does
Oh,
change, but
Oh,
tarragon, yeah, that comes from
wow.
France, and I love
okay.
that
Yeah.
flavor.
Mm.
Yeah, tarragon.
Okay. Okay. Nice.
Ooh, I started drooling instantly.
I know, right? You love it or you don't.
Uh, Um, a question for you related to your some more of your outdoor activity because you bike, I think, right?
hmm
So what would be on your list, like your bucket list, a place you would want to do a biking tour that you haven't?
Yeah, there is a ride. Now I've been off, I think we talked about I've been off the ride in terms of training just because of working,
hmm
time. I'm working with increasing the bone density. That is not,
hmm
I love my bike, but it doesn't help
Yeah.
that,
Right.
right? So
Right.
so I've been working a lot more in flexibility and balance work. But there is a ride, and I think it's from Telluride to Gateway, which you guys would know. And it's
Mm,
a special ride that takes you down, through that Telluride Valley and down the back way, down towards
Um,
Naturita, I think.
mm,
And I drove it recently. So that's one ride. And then the other really is from where I am in Grand Junction down to Gateway, which is through the Dolores route, down the
mhm.
Dolores River route, which
mm,
is not the easiest route, but man, is it beautiful. So
Yeah.
those would be two.
Nice. I love
that's
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
great.
Last but not least, and we did ask you this last time because this is our staple, number five. If you only had one piece of advice to give to athletes, what would that one piece of advice be?
I bet my answer is the same as last time, is get your genes tested.
I was pretty much
Please.
thinking you were going to
I'm
tell us that.
love it.
Because now you've got the technology that can connect not only how you're built to how you perform, and you can measure it. So if you don't have genomics, you're missing out on, I don't know, maybe 30% of how you can self-optimize.
Yeah.
I cannot tell
Yeah,
you that enough. And
it's
yet it's a
huge.
big missing piece in athletics. I mean,
Oh,
that
it's
that is going
huge.
to be the
Oh my
difference
gosh.
between you winning and staying winning, especially if
Yeah.
you go into like, masters years or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and being the one who's sidelined because you were constantly injured. It's just like, just do it.
Yeah.
Preach,
Just do it.
preach.
Yeah.
Love it, love it. Oh my
Yes.
gosh, Amanda, thank you so much for sharing. I know a small portion of all of your wisdom with us, but we're so grateful for you. And I know our listeners will benefit highly from this episode. And we do look forward, if we can, have you on again here in the next year would be amazing. But we will look forward to following your new pod and all the other good things you have cooking up. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Always good being with you guys.
Thanks, Amanda.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.